Alright, so here we have a hand from PokerStars, $100 buy-in, 50-cent $1 blinds. So we have pocket eights here in middle position. Go ahead and open raise, pretty standard, using pot size raise. Villain here opts to do a little min 3-bet, so we don't have any real history with this opponent. New player at the table, but whenever I see something like this, there's a temptation to 4-bet because the sizing's so small, maybe they're doing it light, but with a hand like this where I'm kind of strong, there's not a lot of value in bluffing it. I'm kind of just happy to call and see what develops. I think if they have an overpair, they're likely to play it very straightforward. And we're in position, so that also gives an advantage post-flop. So this villain is kind of short stacked, so obviously set mining isn't necessarily the best thing to do, even though you're getting, but I mean, in that case, you're getting great value to do it. You're calling 3.5 more big blinds to see it, and I think you have the right amount of equity there. Not necessarily to set mine, but to continue given, the min 3-bet. If they were to appropriately size their 3-bet or jam, something like that, you might consider folding. But I mean, I think from a GTO standpoint, which may be the default against a newer player, especially a newer short stack player who's likely to be a little bit tilty, pocket eights is probably a call. But I have no, especially when playing online, I have no issues playing a little bit tighter. But anyway, we flopped a set, so villain checks to us. I'm happy to just go ahead and bet. We're in position. There's no point in 3-betting it. There's also 2 of the same suit on the board, so you may want to get a little bit of protection. Villain's range here, because it's always worth noting what their range might be, is actually pretty wide. They could have ace-king. They could be slow playing pocket kings, although that's unlikely. They could have pocket aces that they're slow playing. They could have pocket. I put them more on something like pocket jacks, pocket queens, pocket tens, something that where they have a pair but it's lower than a pair of kings. I think that probably makes the most amount of sense, given the 3-bet and then check. So my bet sizing here, a little less than half pot. It's enough to kind of keep those hands around, and I think that's probably what you want to do here is you want to balance getting a little bit of protection against flush draws, although I think that's kind of a limited part of their range, while getting value out of those pocket pairs. So here I opt to go ahead and bet 15 big blinds, a little bit bigger. I think I could have bet a little bit smaller here with the intention of then jamming river, because I think they'd be a lot more likely to call a 10 big blind bet, and then they're only going to have about 20 big blinds left behind into a, at that point it'll be about a 45 big blind pot. But I do have to go ahead and go with that half pot sizing. Villain calls, so we've got a 55 big blind pot here. Villain now goes ahead and shoves. The only thing I'm worried about the villain having here, realistically, because I mean king 8, obviously not very likely, king 7, not very likely, is pocket kings, which again is very unlikely, and if I lose to quads, I lose to quads. So very easy call, and villain flips over pocket queens. This is interesting because I think whenever the king hit on the river, they assumed, oh, well, it's so unlikely that my opponent has a king, so I'm just going to bet. But if that's their thought process, a check call would make a lot more sense, or just a check, hope to get the showdown value, because if I don't have a king and I've been bluffing all this time and then you jam, well, like what? Because you don't think I have a king, well, then like, why would you bet if you're only going to get called by the king or something better? So that doesn't really make any sense. But this is just a good example of how not to play your hand in terms of the way the villain played it. Min 3-betting, obviously their 3-betting size should have been a lot bigger. They were out of position. Should have been 4 times my bet plus any dead money. I would bet big enough to where I just, especially whenever they're short stacked, which I would never play a cash game short stacked like that, but I would, if I were in their shoes, I would have 3-bet bigger and then just jammed flop most of the time, although with the king hitting, that does present some issues. They were also short stacked enough that you could argue for just jamming pre-flop. I mean, it's kind of a bad situation for them to be in on the flop. if they get a call just with the pocket queens and the overcard hitting. You know, I mean, it's like there are a lot of different ways this could have ended in them getting stacked, although I do think they could have folded out a lot more hands if they 3-bet sized more appropriately, and then you know, a little bit of pot controlling might have made some sense for them here. The way they played it, just very passively, doesn't make much sense, but it, you know, it's a good scoop and a good example of you know, just exploiting a not very good poker player.